For privacy reasons, I'll be using different names in this story. My name is Sophia, and I'm a successful lawyer in my state. Because of the nature of my work and the people involved, keeping my identity private is very important to me. I never imagined that one day I would have to fight for my own dignity against the man I had once loved more than anyone else. My husband, Xander, and I had been together for many years. Like many couples, we started with love, dreams, and plans for the future. When we first met, I believed I had found the person who would stand beside me through everything. We married, built a life together, and for years I believed our relationship was strong. At least, that was what I thought. Over time, Xander began changing. He became distant. He spent more and more time away from home, claiming that his business required him to travel constantly. He took frequent business trips and became strangely protective of his phone and laptop. Whenever I asked questions, he would brush me off. At the same time, he started criticizing me. I was a lawyer, and although I was proud of my career, Xander never seemed impressed by it. He earned more money through his business, and he used that difference to make me feel small. He acted as if my career was somehow less important because I didn't make as much money as he did. He also began making cruel comments about my appearance. Sometimes he would look at me and say nothing. Other times, he would casually point out women he considered beautiful. Little by little, his comments damaged my confidence. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that every marriage went through difficult periods. I thought perhaps Xander was under pressure because of his business. I believed that if I was patient, things would eventually return to normal. I was wrong. One day, while Xander was supposedly away on another business trip, something inside me finally told me to stop making excuses for him. I opened his old laptop. What I found changed everything. There was a secret Facebook account I had never known about. At first, I could barely bring myself to look through it. But the truth was sitting right in front of me. Xander was having an affair. There were messages, photographs, and conversations with another woman. She was beautiful, and it became painfully obvious that Xander had been seeing her for some time. Suddenly, all those late nights made sense. All those business trips made sense. All those moments when he avoided looking me in the eyes made sense. My heart broke, but I was also furious. When Xander returned, I confronted him. "Are you cheating on me?" I asked. "I know what you've been doing. I have proof." I expected him to apologize. I expected shock. Maybe I even expected him to beg me to forgive him. Instead, Xander looked at me with an expression I will never forget. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't sorry. He was annoyed that I had discovered the truth. "Sophia," he said coldly, "you're just not interesting anymore." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. He continued. "You're always buried in pointless cases. You spend all your time working. And honestly, you're not exactly a supermodel. What am I supposed to do? I want someone who can actually captivate me." His words felt like knives. I swallowed my tears and said, "What are you talking about, Xander? You knew I was a lawyer when you married me. I have a demanding career, and you never complained about it before. I haven't neglected you. You stopped coming home. You stopped talking to me." But he wasn't listening. Instead of taking responsibility for cheating, he blamed me. He tried to make his affair sound like something I had caused. I couldn't believe it. "You cheated on me," I said. "That was your decision. Don't try to put that responsibility on me." For a moment, he was silent. Then he gave me a cold smile. "Good," he said. "I'm actually relieved you found out." My stomach dropped. "What?" "I don't have to hide her anymore," he said. "I love her. She and I are going to have a perfect life together." Then came the words that shattered whatever remained of my hope. "After I divorce you, I'm going to marry someone who is actually worthy of me and my name." I felt as if someone had pulled the ground out from underneath me. This was the man I had loved for more than a decade. The man I had supported. The man I had stood beside through difficult times. The man whose vows I had taken seriously. And now he was standing in front of me, proudly telling me that another woman was better than me. Tears filled my eyes. How can you say these things to me, Xander? I asked. I've been beside you all these years. I honored my vows. I supported you. I put our marriage first. His answer was heartless. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. You're just not right for me. I wiped my tears. I am a capable woman, I said. I may not fit whatever narrow idea you have of beauty, but I've been a good wife to you. If you want a divorce, at least have the courage to admit that you chose to betray me. He looked at me without emotion. I'm not thinking about divorce, Sophia. I felt a tiny bit of relief. Then he finished his sentence. I've already decided. I'm done with you. He told me that he had already hired a lawyer and would soon file for divorce. Then he said something even crueler. You'd better move out before I come home. I don't want to see your face anymore. A few hours later, Xander sent the divorce papers through a friend. When the friend handed them to me, he looked at me with sympathy. He clearly knew that I was hurting. I accepted the papers without saying much. Then I closed the door, went into my room, and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the years I had given to Xander. Most of all, I cried because I realized that the man I had loved was not the man I thought he was. But after the tears came something else. Determination. I refused to let Xander destroy me. I was hurt, but I was not helpless. I was a lawyer. I knew how important it was to understand my rights before making any emotional decisions. Then I learned something that changed the entire situation. When Xander's friend delivered the divorce papers, he mentioned that Xander had been talking about dragging the divorce process out. At first, I couldn't understand why. Then I remembered something from our marriage agreement. Because of Xander's infidelity and the terms of our agreement, I could be entitled to a significant share of the business and marital assets. Suddenly, everything became clear. Xander didn't want a quick divorce because he was afraid of losing money. He had probably expected me to be too heartbroken to fight. He thought he could pressure me into giving up what I was legally entitled to. That was his biggest mistake. I immediately contacted his lawyer and arranged a meeting. Within 2 days, I had moved out of Xander's house. Fortunately, I owned my childhood home, so I moved back there. It was strange returning to the place where I had grown up, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. After moving my belongings, I sent Xander a message. I told him that I had taken everything that belonged to me and moved out. Then I added one final sentence. You wanted my ugly face and body out of your house. Consider it done. His response came quickly. He seemed pleased that I had left without making a scene. Good, he wrote. I'm glad you've finally come to your senses. He even bragged about the reputation of the lawyer he had hired. I read his message and almost laughed. He still had no idea what he was dealing with. I replied calmly. You'll hear from me through my lawyer. From now on, I don't want direct contact unless it is absolutely necessary. I also told him that I expected him to return everything that belonged to me. Then I put my phone down. For the first time, I wasn't crying. I was angry. But it was a different kind of anger. It was the kind that clears your mind. Xander had spent years believing I was weak because I didn't make as much money as he did. He thought my career wasn't impressive enough. He thought my appearance wasn't good enough. He thought I would simply accept whatever he decided. He had underestimated me completely. I contacted a lawyer who was familiar with the situation and arranged to meet him at a cafe. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. The moment he recognized me, his confidence disappeared. His hands began to shake slightly. At first, I wondered why he looked so nervous. Then I realized he knew exactly who I was. He knew my reputation. He knew my career. He knew the kind of cases I had handled. Xander had always assumed that because I was quiet at home, I was powerless. He had confused kindness with weakness. That was the mistake that was about to cost him dearly. I sat across from the lawyer and calmly explained everything. I showed him the evidence of Xander's affair. I explained the terms of our marriage agreement. I showed him the divorce papers. And I told him exactly what I intended to do. I wasn't going to destroy Xander out of revenge. I wasn't going to fight because I wanted his money. I was going to fight because I refused to let a man who had betrayed me decide how my future would look. For years, I had allowed Xander's opinion of me to become louder than my own. That ended the day I discovered his affair. I finally understood something important. My worth had never depended on how much money I earned. It had never depended on whether my husband thought I was beautiful. It had never depended on whether another woman was younger or prettier. And it certainly had never depended on Xander's approval. I had built my own career. I had worked hard for my success. I had earned my reputation. And I had spent years proving that I could stand on my own. Xander thought divorce would be the end of my story. He was wrong. It was the beginning of the chapter where I finally took control of my own life. I decided not to intimidate Jake any further. He was only doing his job, and honestly, he wasn't responsible for the mess my husband had created. There was no reason for me to make things harder for him. "Hello, Jake. It's nice to finally meet you," I said as I noticed the surprise on his face. He looked at me for a moment as if he was trying to figure out why I was there. "If you're wondering who I am, let me make things simple for you. Yes, I am Xander's wife." Jake immediately looked uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't expecting you to come here." "I figured that," I replied calmly. "And before you start wondering why our surnames are different, let me explain. I got married after I completed my law degree, so I continued using my maiden name for my professional and official work." "Ah, I understand," Jake muttered. He still looked uneasy. "So, I'm guessing you came here because you want to make this divorce case as difficult and as long as possible," he said carefully. "That's what my client told me." I almost laughed. "Your client has been misleading you, Jake." He frowned. "Xander is the one who wants to drag this case out. Isn't that what he told you?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I could tell he wasn't used to being questioned like this, especially by the person on the other side of his case. But I was a lawyer too, and after years of working in the field, I had learned how to recognize when someone was hiding something. "You don't have to answer that," I said, softening my tone. "I've known Xander for more than 10 years. I married that idiot, for God's sake. I know exactly how his mind works." Jake gave me a nervous look. I felt a little sorry for him. He had walked into this case believing he understood the situation, only to discover that his own client had left out half the truth. "Since I know you're just doing your job, I'll tell you what is really going on," I continued. "It's not fair to you to keep working with incomplete information." "What do you mean, Jake asked. I took a slow breath. "Did my husband tell you that he cheated on me?" The question immediately changed his expression. He looked surprised, almost shocked. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. "No," he finally admitted. "I don't think my client told me about that. He did warn me, though. According to him, you would make baseless accusations because you were angry and wanted to destroy him." I couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Oh, Jake. I'm sorry to tell you this, but your client has played you like a fiddle." Jake looked embarrassed. "Although," I added, "there might be one thing that makes you feel a little better. Xander actually thinks you're one of the best lawyers around." Jake gave a small smile. "That's quite a compliment." "It is. But I'll never measure up to you," he said honestly. I raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" "I wish Xander had told me that his wife was also a lawyer. He only told me that you worked at a law firm." I looked away for a moment. That statement didn't surprise me. Xander had never taken my career seriously. In his eyes, my achievements were always something small, something that existed in the shadow of his own success. Whenever I accomplished something, he found a way to make it sound unimportant. Sometimes I wondered why I had stayed with him for so long. The answer was complicated. Love could make a person ignore things they would never tolerate from anyone else. But there was one thing I had done right. I had protected myself. "The good thing is that I signed a prenuptial agreement," I said. Jake's expression changed immediately. "A prenup?" "Yes." He stared at me. I could practically see the questions forming in his mind. I wasn't surprised by his reaction. Xander had clearly never mentioned it. Apparently, my husband had conveniently forgotten to tell his lawyer that our marriage came with a very important legal agreement. Maybe Xander thought I had forgotten about it. Maybe he thought I would be too emotional to use it. Or maybe he simply believed he could lie his way out of everything, just as he had done throughout our marriage. Whatever his reason was, it didn't matter anymore. The truth was sitting right in front of Jake. "There's a prenup in this marriage?" Jake asked. "Your husband never mentioned that." "No, he didn't." "Do you have proof?" I smiled. "Oh, I have plenty of proof, Jake." I reached into my handbag. I brought the original documents with me. I had a feeling Xander might try to avoid dealing with the consequences of his actions. Jake looked at the papers I placed on the table. "May I see them?" "Of course." He carefully picked up the documents and began reading. Then he looked up. "I'd also need evidence of the affair if you have any." "I have that too." I pulled out my phone and a folder containing printed documents. "Don't worry. I came prepared." Jake stared at me. I could tell he was beginning to understand what kind of case he had actually walked into. "I told you, Jake. I'm not the one trying to delay this divorce. I want it over as quickly as possible." I handed him everything. There were messages, photographs, dates, documents, and other evidence that proved exactly what Xander had done. I had saved everything. Not because I enjoyed collecting evidence against my husband, but because I had learned a long time ago that trusting his word wasn't enough. Jake went through every document carefully. The more he read, the more serious his expression became. Finally, he put everything down and looked at me. "I see," he said quietly. "You have solid evidence." "I do." I honestly had no idea about any of this. "I figured you didn't." I wasn't angry with Jake. In fact, I understood his position better than most people would. Being a lawyer is difficult enough when your client is honest, I told him. It must be even harder when your own client doesn't tell you the whole story, especially when the opposing side has a lawyer who knows exactly what she's doing. Jake gave a tired smile. "You're right about that." He gathered the papers and placed them neatly back on the table. "I think that's everything I needed to discuss today. Before I decide how to proceed with this case, I need to have a serious conversation with my client." I nodded. "I'm sure someone will contact you soon," he continued. "Although I can't promise that person will be me." I understood what he meant. Xander had put his own lawyer in an impossible position. There was only so much deception Jake could tolerate before deciding that continuing the case wasn't worth it. "Thank you for being honest with me," I said. "Thank you for telling me the truth." We shook hands, and I left the cafe. The moment I stepped outside, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in days, the sadness that had been sitting inside me was gone. There was no more confusion. No more wondering whether I had imagined things. No more asking myself why Xander had betrayed me. The truth was finally clear. And beneath all that sadness was something much stronger. Anger. Not the kind of anger that makes a person lose control, but the kind that makes you stand straight, wipe away your tears, and decide that you will never allow someone to destroy you again. I went straight back to work. I opened my files, organized my documents, reviewed the evidence, and started preparing everything I needed for the divorce. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Xander to decide what happened next. He had made his choices. Now he would have to live with them. And for the first time since discovering his affair, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. It took Xander only one day to contact me. Ironically, he called my personal number even though he had specifically told me not to contact him directly. That was Xander. He could create rules for everyone else, but somehow those rules never seemed to apply to him. I looked at my phone when his name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. Then I smiled. I wanted to hear what he had to say. I answered. "What?" His voice came through immediately, filled with anger. "What the hell did you say to my lawyer, Sophia?" I leaned back in my chair. I couldn't help laughing. My, look who's calling. Don't play games with me. You were the one who told me to stay away from you. So what happened? What did you tell Jake? I could hear the frustration in his voice. Why don't you tell me what happened with your lawyer? Sophia, stop playing around. Tell me what you said to him. What did you tell him that made him quit? I smiled. Your lawyer quit today? There was a pause. Yes. That's unfortunate, Xander. You're ruining everything. No, Xander. You did that yourself. You have no idea what you're doing. Oh, I think I know exactly what I'm doing. You are a nobody, he shouted. I won't let you take away my family business. His words were supposed to frighten me. Once upon a time, they probably would have. But that woman no longer existed. I had spent too many years allowing Xander to make me feel small. I had listened to him dismiss my career, question my intelligence, and act as though everything I achieved was somehow less important because I was his wife. But now I wasn't standing beside him. I was standing against him. And I knew the law. I knew the documents. I knew the evidence. Most importantly, I knew the truth. So I calmly replied, "Oh, Xander. I'd really like to see you try." For the first time, there was silence on the other end of the phone. And that silence told me everything. Xander was finally realizing that this wasn't the same marriage he had controlled for years. This time, I wasn't begging him to stay. I wasn't crying for answers. I wasn't asking him to choose me. I was walking away. And I was taking back my life with me. I never thought I would see the day when the man who once threatened to destroy me in court would stand at my front door, looking tired, defeated, and desperate for my mercy. But that is exactly what happened. A few days earlier, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Xander, had been full of confidence. He had looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I'll hire a better lawyer. Just wait and watch. I'll destroy you in court." I almost laughed. Instead, I calmly looked at him and said, "You can try. In fact, I wish you good luck. But as a lawyer, I should give you one small piece of advice. Make sure you tell your new lawyer everything. Tell them about your affair. And, most importantly, tell them about the prenuptial agreement." The moment I mentioned the prenup, his confidence disappeared for a second. Then he ended the conversation and walked away. I stood there watching him leave, and I couldn't help but smile. Xander still had no idea how much trouble he was in. He believed that money could solve every problem. He thought he could hire the most expensive lawyer in town, drag the divorce out for months, and somehow pressure me into giving up my rights. What he didn't understand was that this was not just another argument between husband and wife. I knew the law. I knew the agreement we had signed. And I knew exactly what his affair had done to his position. I had built a good reputation in my profession over the years. People knew my name. They knew I was serious about my work, and they knew I did not make empty threats. Because of that, finding a lawyer willing to take Xander's case was not as easy as he had imagined. He probably thought he could simply walk into a law office, put a large amount of money on the table, and have someone fight for him. But money cannot always fix a bad case. Especially when the client is not telling his lawyer the whole truth. Xander had already been dishonest about the affair and the prenup. Any lawyer who discovered those facts would immediately realize that representing him could become a nightmare. Still, Xander refused to accept reality. He kept looking. He contacted one lawyer after another. And one by one, they refused to take his case. I knew he would eventually come back to me. I just didn't know how long it would take. Then, one morning, I got my answer. I was getting ready for work when someone knocked on my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was still early, and I had no reason to believe a visitor would show up at that hour. When I opened the door, I froze for a moment. Xander was standing there. But this wasn't the confident man who had threatened me with court. This version of Xander looked exhausted. His clothes were slightly wrinkled, his face looked tired, and the arrogance I had become so familiar with was nowhere to be seen. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his plan was falling apart. I stepped aside and let him come in. I didn't want him standing outside my house and creating a scene. Once he entered, I closed the door and looked at him. "Make it quick, Xander," I said. "I don't have time to waste. We agreed that we would communicate through our lawyers from now on, so I don't understand why you're here." He lowered his eyes. About that, he said quietly. I haven't been able to find a good divorce lawyer yet. I almost smiled. That sounds like a difficult problem for you. He didn't answer. I continued, you should probably hurry. I thought your girlfriend was very eager to marry you. His expression changed immediately. I'm not worried about her anymore, Sophia. Please. We need to talk. I crossed my arms. About what? You've been sabotaging me. I stared at him. What? You've been making sure lawyers won't take my case. That's unfair, Sophia. For a second, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because his accusation was so ridiculous. You really believe I'm responsible for this? Yes, he said. I've spoken to several lawyers, and none of them want to represent me. That isn't because I sabotaged you, I replied. It's because you're creating your own problems. I don't understand what I did. I looked at him carefully. Do you want me to remind you? He remained silent. You lied to your lawyers about your affair. You also failed to be honest about the prenup. Do you realize how serious that is? A lawyer can't properly represent a client who hides important facts from them. Xander looked uncomfortable. I continued. You thought lawyers would fight for you simply because you were willing to pay them. But good lawyers don't work that way. They need to know the truth. They need to understand what they're getting into. He rubbed his forehead. I made mistakes. Yes, I said. You did. I didn't think things would go this far. That doesn't change anything. He looked at me for a long moment. I know your name carries weight in this profession now. I raised an eyebrow. Now? He sighed. I didn't understand how respected you were. That sentence told me everything. For years, Xander had treated my career as if it were something small compared with his business. He had never really respected what I did. He assumed his company, his money, and his connections made him more important. Now he was finally learning that I had built something of my own. Something he couldn't control. He sat down and looked completely defeated. I've tried being honest with lawyers, he said. But nobody wants to take my case. That is what happens when you make decisions without thinking about the consequences. He looked at me. You're really going to take half of my business? I didn't hesitate. You were the one who agreed to that condition. His face went pale. Our prenup had been clear. We had both signed it. There was a specific clause concerning the division of his business if he cheated. At the time, neither of us thought we would ever need that clause. But Xander had made sure it mattered. You knew what you were signing, I reminded him. I never thought you'd actually enforce it. That isn't my problem. He looked down at the floor. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Why? Because you betrayed me, Xander. And because I have every right to protect what belongs to me. He shook his head. It was a mistake. I almost couldn't believe how easily he said it. A mistake. That was the word he had chosen for everything. His affair was a mistake. His lies were mistakes. His attempts to hide the truth were mistakes. His threats were probably mistakes too. But every mistake had consequences. Please believe me, he said. I've already put my relationship with her on hold. I stared at him. And maybe we can give our marriage another chance. I laughed. I couldn't stop myself. The man who had cheated on me, threatened me, lied to lawyers, and tried to frighten me into giving up my rights was now standing in my home asking for another chance. It was almost unbelievable. You want to come back to me? Yes. Why? He looked at me with desperation. Because I realize now that I made a terrible mistake. No, I said quietly. You realized that your mistake is going to cost you. He didn't answer. That silence told me more than his words ever could. I had heard rumors that he had put his relationship with his mistress on hold. But I didn't care. Whether he had left her because he regretted hurting me or because he realized he might lose his business didn't matter anymore. My heart had already made its decision. There had been a time when I would have done anything to save our marriage. I would have forgiven mistakes. I would have tried to understand him. I would have stayed awake at night wondering what I could do to make things better. But that woman was gone. The woman sitting across from Xander now was different. I had finally learned that loving someone did not mean allowing them to disrespect me. I had learned that forgiveness did not mean giving up my rights. And most importantly, I had learned that I could survive without him. Xander had spent weeks believing he could scare me into backing down. He had threatened me with court. He had tried to find a lawyer who would help him fight me. He had blamed me for his problems. And now he was sitting in my home, asking me to save him from the consequences of his own choices. I looked at him and realized something. He wasn't coming back because he suddenly understood my value. He was coming back because he finally understood what losing me would cost him. And by then, it was already too late. I stood up and walked toward the door. Our lawyers can handle the rest, I told him. He looked at me desperately. Sophia, please. I opened the door. For the first time since our marriage began, I felt completely free. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten him. I didn't need revenge. I simply needed to stand firm and let the truth speak for itself. Xander had once told me that I would come begging him for mercy. Instead, he was the one who came to my door asking for mine. And I knew I wasn't going to give it to him. The rumors were true. Xander's relationship with his mistress was falling apart, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. But if he thought that her unhappiness would somehow make me run back into his arms, he was completely wrong. I had already made the biggest mistake of my life by marrying him. I had learned my lesson the hardest way possible, and I had no intention of repeating it. I looked at him and shook my head. You must be living in a different world if you think I am going to come back to you, Xander. He stared at me. I know we can fix this, Sophia. No, I replied. You know what you want. And it isn't me. He looked confused. I don't understand. You want your business back. He immediately became quiet. I knew I had hit the truth. I had spent enough years with Xander to recognize when he was pretending. He wasn't suddenly in love with me again. He wasn't suddenly sorry because he had broken my heart. He was scared. He had finally realized that the prenup was real, the consequences were real, and I was not going to give up my rights just because he regretted getting caught. He tried again. Sophia, we were happy once. Can't we just forget what happened? It was one mistake. We can start over. I'll end things with her completely. I swear. I almost laughed. There is no need for you to make promises about your mistress to me. He looked at me. I continued, believe me, Xander, the moment that woman realizes you aren't going to be rich after this divorce, she will probably disappear faster than you can imagine. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was simply being realistic. And from everything I had seen, I had a feeling that I was right. As for me, I said, this divorce is my chance to finally walk away from a marriage that was never what I thought it was. He looked hurt. But I didn't feel sorry for him. I should actually thank you, I added. You showed me who you really were before we had children. That may be the one thing I should be grateful for. Xander lowered his head. You don't have to take half my company. You knew the agreement before you cheated. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But it did. He continued begging. He promised that he would change. He promised that he would become a better husband. He promised that our marriage could be saved. I listened for a while, but none of his words reached my heart. I had heard promises before. I had heard apologies before. And I had heard him say that he loved me before. Then I remembered all the nights I had cried myself to sleep because of him. I remembered how lonely I had felt while being married. I remembered the shock of discovering his affair. I remembered the way he tried to make me feel as if I were the problem. Seeing him sitting in front of me, scared and desperate, did not make me want him back. If anything, it gave me closure. For so long, I had wondered whether he understood how badly he had hurt me. Now I knew. He finally understood what he was losing. Unfortunately for him, understanding came too late. I had already made my decision. I wanted a clean break. I wanted peace. I wanted a life where I didn't have to question the person sleeping beside me. And most importantly, I wanted a future that belonged to me. Xander continued trying to change my mind for weeks. I ignored most of it. I didn't argue with him. I didn't chase him. I didn't respond to every message. I simply moved forward. He had already filed for divorce, so there was no reason for me to keep living inside the drama he had created. I also knew that I didn't want to personally deal with him throughout the entire process. I wasn't a divorce lawyer, and even if I knew enough about the law to understand my position, I didn't want my emotions involved in every legal discussion. So I hired someone from my own firm to represent me. It was the best decision I could have made. My lawyer handled the communication, the paperwork, and the negotiations. That meant I could focus on my work and my future instead of spending every day arguing with Xander. For about a month, he continued hoping that I would change my mind. I never did. Eventually, reality caught up with him. He realized that if the matter went to court, things could become much worse for him. The evidence against him was strong. The prenup was clear. And I had proof of his affair. There was very little room for him to pretend that none of it had happened. So eventually, Xander stopped fighting. He agreed that the best option was to have a clean and mutual divorce. For me, the legal process was surprisingly straightforward. The prenup had already explained what would happen if one of us cheated. And Xander had clearly violated that agreement. I had evidence to support my claim, so there was no reason for me to give up what I was legally entitled to. According to the agreement, half of his business would go to me. Xander was furious. But he had no real way out. He had signed the document. He had understood the terms. And he had broken the condition. Eventually, he signed over half of the business. There was even an offer made for Xander to buy my share back. But there was one problem. He didn't have enough money. That might sound strange. After all, Xander had built a successful business. He had once lived in a huge house and spent money without thinking twice. So how did he suddenly have no money? The answer was simple. He had spent far too much of it on his mistress. Trips. Expensive gifts. Luxury dinners. Jewelry. Hotels. Anything she wanted, Xander had been willing to provide. He had believed that spending money would keep her happy. But once the divorce became real and his financial situation changed, she stopped answering his calls. Then she stopped replying to his messages. Eventually, she disappeared from his life completely. I wasn't surprised. Maybe she had fallen in love with him. Maybe she had fallen in love with the lifestyle he provided. But when the money started disappearing, she disappeared too. Xander finally learned the difference. Meanwhile, his financial situation continued getting worse. Losing half of his business meant losing a large portion of his income. The mansion he had once been so proud of became too expensive for him to maintain. He couldn't comfortably handle the mortgage, the maintenance, and all the other expenses that came with that lifestyle. Eventually, he sold the house. The man who once bragged about his success was now renting a much smaller condo. It was a huge change. But I didn't feel sorry for him. He had made his choices. And now he was living with them. Even after everything, Xander tried one more time to come back into my life. But this time, I knew exactly why. He didn't suddenly discover that I was the love of his life. He wanted full control of his business again. If he could convince me to reconcile, he might have a chance of getting everything back. But that was never going to happen. I had finally learned to see through him. There was no going back. He had already shown me what kind of man he was. And I had no interest in giving him another opportunity to hurt me. As for me, my life changed in ways I never expected. I didn't personally manage every detail of the business anymore. Instead, I appointed someone I trusted to oversee my share. That allowed me to continue focusing on my legal career while still benefiting from my ownership. And surprisingly, everything worked out better than I had imagined. My income came from two places now. I had my career, which I had worked hard to build, and I also had my share of the business. For the first time in years, I felt financially independent in a way I had never experienced before. I upgraded my lifestyle too. I bought a beautiful new mansion, but this time, it wasn't because I needed to impress anyone. It was mine. Every room represented something I had achieved on my own. Every morning I woke up knowing that I wasn't trapped in a marriage that made me unhappy. I could make my own decisions. I could plan my own future. I could spend my time however I wanted. Most importantly, I could finally breathe. Sometimes I think about how differently I once imagined my life would turn out. I thought I would grow old with Xander. I thought our marriage would last forever. I thought the person I trusted most would always stand beside me. I was wrong. But being wrong about him didn't mean my life was ruined. In fact, leaving him gave me the opportunity to discover who I really was without him. I stopped seeing myself as the woman who had been betrayed. I started seeing myself as the woman who survived it. The woman who rebuilt her life. The woman who refused to let someone else's bad choices destroy her future. Looking back now, I don't regret walking away. I don't regret enforcing the agreement. I don't regret protecting what I had earned. And I definitely don't regret refusing to take Xander back. He once believed he could betray me and still control the ending. He thought he could threaten me with lawyers. He thought he could scare me into giving up my rights. He thought I would eventually become tired and walk away with nothing. Instead, I stood my ground. His affair cost him his marriage. His lies cost him his reputation. His careless spending cost him his money. And his own choices cost him half of the business he cared about so much. Meanwhile, I gained something far more valuable than revenge. I gained my freedom. I gained peace. I gained confidence. And I built a life that was better than the one I had before. People sometimes ask me whether I think karma is real. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe sometimes people simply have to face the natural results of their own decisions. But I do know one thing. Xander spent years believing that he was the one in control. In the end, he lost the marriage, the mistress, the mansion, and half of the business. And I walked away with my dignity, my career, my future, and a life I genuinely love. So, if you ask me whether I won the divorce, my answer is simple. I didn't set out to destroy Xander. I simply stopped allowing him to destroy me. And that turned out to be the best decision I had ever made.